who's helping me keep on top of the technicalities. Are transcriptions available? We can have the presentation to share. Yeah, we're looking to making the presentations available.
Yeah, at least the recording will be made available. Now we can put it on the page.
Yeah. So adaptation to climate change, I mean, that's one field. Traditionally was thought of as, well, how do you adjust to changing climatic conditions? How do you adjust activities to take, to reduce the negative impacts of climate change and take advantage of any positive effects of climate change? That's how it was initially thought of. So if it gets warmer, you change into a crop that's is more tolerant to warmer temperatures and so on. But then it's increasingly being seen as a broader social and political process where you negotiate, where different interests are negotiated between different groups as you live with various changes that intersect, social environmental changes that intersect with climate change. As part of that, reducing vulnerability and addressing the causes of vulnerability has become central to adaptation research. Which means looking at many of the processes that create marginalization, of course, and that's where we're starting to see why disability studies is extremely useful in trying to inform climate change and how we understand climate change. We also will see that adaptation is not independent of emissions. It's not independent of warming, because the warmer it gets, the more we have to adapt, or we are unable to adapt to reach limits of adaptation with the impacts that has on people in ecosystems. What I find really essential to this interlinkage between climate change and disability is it draws attention to a shift in understanding from sort of implicitly seeing adaptation as kind of fixing people and building resilience of individuals, kind of making them more resilient, as though people as individuals can be, operate as autonomous beings who can be fixed and independently become more resilient, to actually looking at how experience and knowledge of dealing with uncertainty is a resource, and the knowledge of interdependence between people, the importance of solidarity, the ethics behind how we interact with that is actually critical to adaptation. And that I think is very critical to actually shifting how we think of our relations to society and to the environment. So I think that's what I'm going to say as an introduction. We have two presentations. First, Dr. David Mfitumukiza from Makerere University is going to present on some of the work that he's involved in on climate change adaptation. So I started to look into everything that he's done, but he's very central in the local adaptation field, not only within Africa, but internationally, within international networks. We also work on a project together on co-creating knowledge for climate change adaptation, which is central to the thinking. So I'll just let you present without further ado, and then Sarah Bell will present afterwards on focusing in on disability, and then we'll have a discussion after that. We'll keep it informal. I could see people are in the chat, and I can't follow everything on the chat, so I apologize for that, but please keep chatting if you like. I'm just about to share screen. And it's wonderful to see so many people connecting digitally. I'm having trouble getting to the slideshow. Oh, there we go.
Good, thank you. Many thanks, Cecilia, and greetings to those who are joining us virtually and those in the room. And My name is David Mfitumukiza. I'm from Makerere University. Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. Uganda is in East Africa. But specifically, my entry point for my presentation is on a consortium that we put together across listed developed countries as one of the ways of changing the way we do things as universities, particularly in the global south, but also with in mind that this has a lot to do with the way we partner and also the way we work with or build solidarity with other universities across the world. So the consortium is under the auspices of the least developed countries under the UNFCCC. It's a group, the LDC group under UNFCCC arrangements, and it's one of the initiatives which is being built to facilitate capacity building. Yeah, so.
Sorry, David, we're gonna have to retry the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
Because it's not moving on Zoom.
Oh, okay.
So
It's not moving at all.
no, it's not.
So I think we need to stop sharing and then share again. I think usually.
Yeah.
Usually when we do share again, it works. So let's give it another shot.
I like your optimism.
See, does it move?
It's not moving on my screen yet. Is it on the other side of Zoom? It might just be my screen that's slow. Maybe to switch the view. No, it's like switch down. Otherwise, we just, I don't know if you put notes on it, because otherwise you can just stay in the non-presenter mode.
Yeah.
It's the non-presenter mode we can see. It's
Okay.
just not going on the big.
Okay. So not moving on your side.
It's
Okay.
not on mine. Yeah, they can see the shared screen, so at least they can see the slides in display, if that's okay for you.
Okay.
Can you see the slides now?
Yeah, we can see the slide, it's just not in presenter mode.
Okay.
Okay.
It's already.
And does it move?
If you go, yeah, then it's moving. So we just do it this way.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
that's okay.
Okay. Sorry. So sorry about that. So LAC, in short, like I said, is the least developed countries universities consortium on climate change, and it's mainly a south-to-south collaboration network for enhancing research capacity and capabilities on climate change. Now, I'll talk about the thinking behind this, not because it's purely south-to-south, but we noticed that actually there were more networks across south and north than there were across south to south, which was very interesting. So the emphasis on south, but actually we record south-north, with an emphasis on south being strengthened. Among many other things that we look at is to enhance capacity of southern universities to develop common research projects and implement teaching and training programs in different climate change topics. And the project that Siri was talking about is actually developed under the auspices, funded by NORAD, but under the auspices of LAC. But then the other thing that we observed from the very beginning is that there was more knowledge in the global north about the south than there was in the global south. And so we need to think about how we can have capacities, organized capacity, which we can have with the repositories of knowledge in global south universities. It's one of the things that we're looking at. So broadly speaking, the consortium works around four broad, or is planned to work around four broad areas: curriculum development, training for faculty members and students, and research, so that there is enhanced capacity within universities for education and research. So it's building capacities for universities, but also as a way of building capacity for the LDCs, meaning that there are quite a lot of capacity issues also in the universities. And then once that capacity is, and it's not like it's parallel, it's concurrent, building capacities within universities, but also while continuously learning by doing as we translate this capacity to grow the capacity of others. through developing trainings, conducting training for different actors in a collaborative way. And then also do publications, contribution, and participation in events so that we're part of thought leadership. An example on this, how this is an issue, is that about 16,000 applications about Africa, for example, reflected in IPCC, about 70% had no author from Global South. So there is that gap of contribution, of absence of knowledge for those who are from Global South in the global academic and research discourse. So it's one of the things that I think probably through this initiative we can be able to, and ultimately be able to have capacity in all ADCs to be able to adapt effectively to the adverse impacts of climate change. I'm emphasizing adaptation not because it's all about adaptation, but we think it's the entry point and point of emphasis in contributing to capacity, responsive capacity to climate change. And one of the focus areas is to work with the most vulnerable countries and for the most vulnerable communities and social groups in ways that foster collaboration, collaborative learning and capacity building. And this collaborative learning is across South, but also across South, North. And that's the very reason actually we are working on a number of things with the, really the course that we're working with NMBU. So we thought that there was some thoughts of moving from business as usual to business unusual. With the recognition that quite a lot of bottom-up approaches in terms of education, in terms of the research, and in ways that we are not actually building sustainable institutional arrangements to support efforts for adaptation in the Global South. I gave you an example of having abysmal applications from Global South, and not because it's not possible, but probably it's to do with capacity. So we need to improve our approaches to adaptation research. We also think that universities in the Global South need to change, whereby essentially you don't sit in your offices and then you think of things you want to do and think of what's called impact on ground. So we think that needs to change. And one other thing, of course, is that we really think that action-oriented research should be one of the points of emphasis. Of course, there's an issue of incentive regimes. If you have to be promoted in the university, it's not how much you impact on communities, like how many publications and things like that. But we think that if we are to bring impact in the adaptation sphere and the climate response sphere, I think we need to move from thinking that we always speak to ourselves. We also need to think of how to think about others. So the incentive regime in universities is like, okay, the more you speak to yourself, the more you are rewarded and promoted. And the research takes that discourse, you know. In the department where I am, I have an environmental science background. If you did research that is focused on qualitative research, we say, so what are the variables? They ask you questions that, you know, can't only think about, I think that everything that counts can be counted. So in terms of, so there is need to do some sort of paradigm shifts, and of course, that's a history. But also think that in this arrangement has to be some shift towards epistemic inclusion, whereby the Global South knowledges and knowledge systems are really being part of the mainstream and kind of integrated ways of doing influencing policies, practice, and so we think there's some sort of quite a lot of, I give an example of some disconnect and some sort of exclusion, partly because of what Global South is doing. Probably they are not doing that job to be able to produce information from the Global South knowledge systems to be part of the mainstream. So we think this needs to change. And the other part, of course, of moving from business as usual to business unusual is observed generalization of vulnerability and lack of focus on its root causes. Just assuming that, and again, back to top-down kind of thinking, we assume that vulnerability is going to be universal everywhere. And this is where we talk about, things about this disability and climate change. You don't see any focused research or training or courses that are focusing on these specific areas of vulnerability because of these general assumptions, vulnerability is vulnerability. Yes, everyone is vulnerable everywhere, but there will be differences in how people are vulnerable. And we think that this will be one of the areas that will be focused on And the focus in doing all this is collaborative knowledge capacity strengthening with local communities, local and community-based NGOs, community organizations, and local governments in ways that are so inclusive in terms of the needs of research, training, and diversity. The diversity of those who are most affected and marginalized by climate change. And the LDC, the consortium has been very much involved in these areas, community-based adaptation and locally led adaptation. We have very many questions of course interrogates. Local adaptation is almost becoming like a buzzword, but it's very good because we think the intention is not about the name, but we think the intentions of these approaches are very much aligned to the thinking we have on how capacity building around adaptation should be happening. And just to be specific, community-based adaptation is much more of an old concept. We're not old, but has been known for a while, much more than local adaptation. We're talking about a community-led process based on communities, priorities, needs, knowledge, and I'm underscoring knowledge because I come from the universities, knowledge and capacities, which should empower people to plan for and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Empowering, I think that's where the issue of power relations, power dynamics, which is a big issue, especially in the global south, especially where I come from. You know, there's where you have in a meeting. One time I was with students in a meeting, we had a focus group discussion. There was only one man in the focus group discussion, but he said everything. I said, the student, come on. So every question the man had an answer, and it's respectful that when a man is talking, some societies have to keep quiet and you observe. So empowerment is still about empowerment, but what kind of empowerment are we looking at? Is it about giving people money? I think it's very important that the power is about making decisions, agenda setting, but also the aspect of removing, doing away with the hegemonic ways of doing things, you know, where there's too much dominance, people are being dominated in the. So we have all these things in the general terms in what we are looking at. The local led adaptation, which we think is something we have contributed actually to the development. This is it's over 150, I think, not for the number, but close to 150 organizations have signed the principles around this concept with very many things to deal with. We have actually publication which will be out soon in NMBU, where we
Yeah, so it's about local people and their communities having individual and collective agency, the freedom and liberty to have choices in dealing with the impacts of climate change and setting priorities and how adaptation takes place. And we think this will be a discourse we think would be contributing, irrespective of how it evolves, irrespective of its pitfalls. We think that it's an entry point for the broader things that have been talked about in what we can do. So, and this also includes individual. You know, the challenge about community-based adaptation, I've said many times, is that community is also a loose concept because it assumes homogeneity, and it's not true. There's quite a lot of assumed homogeneity when we talk about a community-based adaptation. So, but I think there's also need to focus on individual. Of course, collective agency is very important, but I think the more we look at individuals, the more it becomes important in the way priorities are defined, the way adaptation efforts are designed, the way research efforts are designed, the way the knowledge creation processes are designed, and the way monitoring and evaluation of adaptation actions are being done. And working with others, of course, working with others is very important. That those who think about local adaptation, community-based adaptation is about, no, it's the thing is that you can have local adaptation at global level, be it in thinking, the policies, the financing of adaptation. So there's this misconception saying like local adaptation is about yeah, you are there locally and others up there. No, the thinking is that there can be local adaptation practices at global level. So that's I think what I can say about this. It doesn't seem to be moving. I need to. Yes, I have 2 minutes. So it's essentially this is how we came up with one of the projects that Siri is talking about on co-creating knowledge for local adaptation to climate change. And the intention is that actually we needed to come up with frameworks that we can use to continuously create knowledge with individuals and communities based on the different compositions and structures in these communities. So the target is that local communities, I said, have been predominantly looked at as research and practice subjects. Oh, I have a study, I have a very good idea. And then your subject becomes a community, you go there and then you finish. You're saying, I think that's not a good way of doing research. So we want to shift to looking at local communities as collaborators in knowledge creation. How can we look at communities as collaborators in doing, they're not researchers necessarily, but they are part of the stake. And there's lack of recognition, of course. We recognize that even in our countries, lack of recognition of the value of experiential knowledge and learning. That's why I talked about epistemic inequities or equity. We think that this is something we need to, that's how you bring these knowledges into the knowledge systems. And then, of course, we recognize we need capacities. Ever since we began this project, I have learned very many things that I had never appreciated, including yesterday. I'll just show you just my last slide. My student was showing me something that is about innovation in communities, which I had seen very many times, but I never recognized the thinking behind it. So appreciation, there's lack of appreciation of knowledge and skills and in collaborative learning and knowledge co-creation. So this project is partly trying to contribute towards that. There's a need for community-based and local adaptation capacity building for that matter. So this project is about building capacity. How do we build capacity for people being able to know how to co-create, appreciate and co-create knowledge with others, including the universities. In university, if you tell someone, can we have something translated to help community? They say, no, this is not my job. It's okay, but I think there's need to connect so that even when it's not your job, the design and the process accommodates that arrangement. So yeah, I think that's mentorship. We're under that project. We're doing mentorship and training. The first slide is on training on social inclusion by the students and mentees of the project. The next one is about training of extension awareness raising among extension workers. And these are different kind of entry points in terms of collecting the existing knowledge and the reasoning behind the creation of this knowledge and many other things. So there are many things we're doing, also doing integration to curriculum review. I talked about it, but also we are engaging policymakers on the entry points on how we can work to promote knowledge co-creation and collaborative learning. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very well-informed crash course in local adaptation. So thank you. And that actually transitions us very well on to Dr. Sarah Bell's presentation. So she's a senior lecturer at Exeter University, and you introduced yourself yesterday as a disability geographer, which I actually thought that really explains really well, what perhaps disability is about, because I'm a human geographer myself. So it's about how disability is not a personal characteristics as such, but the processes in society that may disable people, which has a parallel to thinking around how people are not necessarily vulnerable per se, but people are put in vulnerable situations through processes that take place in society. So we're just getting your presentation up now, and I'm trying. Oh, and I should mention, Sarah's also leading an ERC project on climate change and disability. So it's been a huge joy to get to know Sarah the past year or two. So started engaging with the topic of disability, and here we have someone who really knows the topic of disability. So Yeah, giving the floor to you. Welcome. So we'll take questions and discussion after Sarah's presentation.
Oh yeah, but no, it's not, no, sorry. No. No. Is it also okay that we do it in the same kind of cheating way? Great, that we can just not lose too much time.
Snazzy animation, but it's fine. Right, let me just, okay, brilliant. Well, thank you. It's really lovely to be here and to meet everyone and everyone online as well. So yeah, I'm Sarah. Most of my research over the last sort of 11, 12 years has been more around experiences of health and well-being and disability in relation to nature and nature experiences and trying to promote socially inclusive access to nature. And I actually thought I would talk about that a little bit today, just because yesterday we had some brilliant discussions around what adaptation can mean and the role of green and blue infrastructure within that. And I just thought that some of that learning might also be useful today. And then I'll talk more about my new project that will be starting in July around disability inclusive climate adaptation. Yeah, so it's a talk of two halves, I should say. All right, yes, great. So the first area I just want to talk about really is around disability wellbeing, nature and social inclusion. And my work in this area really started with my PhD back in 2012. Feels quite a long time ago now, but it really took shape during my subsequent Sensing Nature project, which ran from 2016 to 2018. And it was an in-depth qualitative study exploring how people with sight impairment living in both rural and urban areas of England describe their experiences with and within diverse types of nature. I won't go into all the findings today. I've put a few of the kind of outputs on the screen in case people want to read more, but just to give you some headlines, I suppose, of 4 of the key themes that came out. The first one was around nature as connection. So many participants highlighted several ways in which time spent with nature can provide valuable opportunities to build meaningful relationships with the world, helping to counter feelings of isolation and experience a sense of connection and companionship. Participants described the enlivening influence of nearby nature, be it feeling the sun's warmth or gaining a different sense of space and light. And many described the soothing sensations of a calm breeze, the undemanding companionship of trees and birds, and finding comfort in these gentle interactions with non-human nature, rather than sometimes more complicated, disabling human encounters. A second theme was around nature as freedom. So many participants describe this sense of freedom through spending time in certain types of nature, freedoms that we broadly categorized as social, mobile, and exploratory. So in terms of social freedoms, participants talked about freedom from disabling social attitudes, disabling environments, and overprotective social encounters that perhaps failed to see past impairment, to recognize and respect people's individual skills and abilities. Mobile freedoms really referred to people feeling able to move safely and to choose how and when to engage with nature. For some, going beyond the limits of relatively short sensory trails or small sensory gardens that can often fail to accommodate that kinesthetic sense, that joy of movement. And then building on these mobile freedoms, people talked about the value of exploratory freedoms, to develop the skills required to explore new terrains in nature, from nearby neighbourhood parks to coastlines, caves and hilltops. Participant descriptions of these freedoms really emphasise the varied ways in which people can come to experience nature, not to master it or to overcome impairment, but to ground oneself in the world, to know and to feel part of it. A third theme was around nature as changeable, as ephemeral, and how those real changeable qualities of nature could both enhance and undermine opportunities for well-being and to actually be part of these experiences. So people talked about everything from bulls, cows appearing in previously harmless fields, sea swimmers periodically joined by jellyfish and Portuguese man-o'-war, and the weather, the ever-present quality of everyday nature interaction. People talked about how somewhere could be completely transformed by the sun's glare, by dappling effects, by snow, by strong winds or loud heavy rain, all of which were experienced in some ways as disorientating. whether it's through sound or sight or touch. And many commented on the unruly vegetation that reaches out along paths and pavements in the spring and summer, often masking important tactile and auditory wayfinding cues. So if we're trying to bring in more vegetation into our cities to make them more climate resilient, thinking about how we do that is quite important. Participants also talked about how specific skill sets, endurance, and resourceful improvisation, often developed in collaboration with friends, family, and professionals over time, were needed to build confidence, to cope with and adapt to the vagaries of the weather, the seasons, and the often unpredictable comings and goings of nature's various creatures and critters, including humans. Which brings me to the final theme I was going to talk about just in this project, which was nature's skillscape. So several participants discussed moments of feeling like they'd lost nature with the onset of sight impairment, because of the sheer number of disabling barriers that they encountered in being able to experience nature as their sight and their wider life circumstances were changing. They described the skills and knowledge that they developed to engage with nature on their own terms, qualities they'd had to work at with support, developing new forms of sensory attention and skills to find alternative ways of tuning into, navigating, and deriving pleasure and meaning from different environments. Participants' stories highlighted the emergence of these skillscapes, where skills were developed through repeated encounters with diverse forms of nature over time. And this ranged from participants likening the development of long cane skills to driving lessons, to describing the challenges of wayfinding in difficult weather conditions. One person even used string to navigate the back garden after heavy snow. Learning to identify different plants and animals by sound, touch, and scent rather than sight. And learning to climb, cave, and kayak by touch and through careful auditory instruction. And this skilling up wasn't restricted to participants. So many highlighted the importance of building the awareness and capacities of landscape designers, environmental managers, outdoor adventure providers, walking groups, nature conservation initiatives, to really support these processes. So overall, the study tried to challenge some of the disabling and ableist assumptions that often underpin these prominent discourses around nature and well-being. The idea that you can just pop out to a local park for 2 hours to feel better, that's not an option for some people. And it also really emphasized the need for a culture shift, recognizing disability as a source of creativity, strength, and collective expertise rather than solely an access need. When considering disability in the nature, health, and well-being field, there's a tendency to focus on creating accessible experiences for disabled people. And that tends to medicalize disability, and it often overlooks the role of disabled people as curators of experience, as site volunteers, as storytellers, as education and visitor experience officers and managers. And we explored this as part of a wider project that ran during the pandemic called Restoring Landscapes for Social Inclusion. I won't go into the full project, but a key strand of it involved a really great collaboration with Westonbirt, which is a national arboretum in Gloucestershire in the UK. Andy Shipley, who I've worked with a lot since 2016, he's a sight-impaired sensory explorer. That's how he describes his work. And through this project, we really aim to try and explore new ways of bringing sight-impaired volunteers to the heart of visitor experience and interpretation activities at Westonbirt. So during 2021, we recruited and trained 4 new visually impaired volunteers to join the existing guide team as VI guides and to develop these sensing nature walks. I should say Westonbirt is very much celebrated for its picturesque landscapes, its beautiful autumn colour, its beautiful spring colour. You're allowed on all the grass, but people often forget they can go off the paths and explore and get involved in the trees. So partly it was trying to encourage people to do that. And the VI guides have really been exploring and enabling these new multisensory ways of experiencing and sharing the widely celebrated qualities of the Arboretum through their popular guided walks programme, enticing people off those paths to really explore the kind of textures, the sounds and scents and sensations of the Arboretum. You can read more about that in the Disability Landscapes and Nature booklet that's on the screen there. And in a parallel programme of work called the Unlocking Landscapes Network, we've also been looking at the role of sensory history in opening up new ways into these settings. So really celebrating diversity and how these sites are and have been managed and interpreted and experienced. And this may well involve acknowledging contested or hidden histories and their impacts on who feels part of the site story or otherwise, who feels part of these nature settings. recognizing that, you know, many of the trees in that arboretum weren't discovered from places far away. They were technically stolen from places far away, and telling those stories is an important part of making these experiences feel open to people who might not otherwise feel they have a place in that setting. So lots more about that in that one as well. So that's, you know, a lot of what I've been doing up to now has been more in that area. But I'm sorry, right? Yes. So the second theme that I wanted to talk about today really is, it's a newer area of work for me, and it's developed through this growing sense that any efforts to connect people with nature in the name of health or well-being or otherwise need to be accompanied both by proactive strategies to help people cope and adapt to more distressing dimensions of environmental degradation and loss. With global temperatures approaching 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures, irreversible changes are occurring and will continue to occur across many valued ecosystems and everyday environments in ways that are compounding and creating new forms of social inequality. Anxiety and grief experienced in response to the loss or the fracturing of cherished environments has been described as solastalgia. Although not often considered, there are perhaps parallels between the sense of loss encountered within changing landscapes of home and the sense of loss that can be experienced as the familiar fit between body and world can shift with impairment onset and progression. As noted by feminist disability scholar Rosemary Garland-Thompson, the body becomes disabled when it's out of sync with its physical, social, cultural, and political environments, when it misfits. And misfitting occurs when the environment does not sustain the shape and the function of the body that enters it. Now, again, contrary to common stereotypes of disability as weakness, misfitting on a regular basis necessitates adaptability, anticipation, resourcefulness, and creativity in navigating and building relationships with the world. And these skills are often underdeveloped in people whose bodies fit smoothly into the prevailing sustaining environment. So, although potentially integral to adaptive capacity, these skills of anticipation, resourcefulness, and contingency planning with disability are still largely overlooked within climate adaptation scholarship policy and practice. There's been very little consideration of disability within climate or environmental justice scholarship, beyond a recognition that disabled people are disproportionately exposed to many climate risks. And when mentioned, disability is primarily used as a cautionary tale, understood as a negative condition imprinted on marginalized bodies through environmental harm. Without denying these injustices, we can also move beyond this cautionary tale, recognizing how disabled people are living disartfully in the face of current and anticipated climate change. This idea of living disartfully was introduced by Douglas et al. To meld the artfulness of living with illness and disability with a non-reductive, non-essentialist approach to the materiality of bodies. So in this way, the knowledges and experiences of disabled people could inform new strategies for coping with and adapting to experiences of climate disruption and uncertainty, for reconfiguring a sense of home and curating meaningful lives in seemingly unfamiliar, uncontrollable, and fragile landscapes. Now, disability scholar Julia Watts-Belser has developed this brilliant disability and climate change public archive. I put the link on the slides there. And it shares a range of really pertinent conversations in this area. And in one conversation, she speaks to Marina Heron, probably pronouncing that wrong. She's a disability performing artist, writer, and independent scholar. And she says, disability teaches me limits. In this culture, we act as if there are no limits, but the earth has limits, the flesh has limits. There are boundaries for where to go and where not to go. If we learn to listen to our bodies, it can lead us to learn to listen to the land, and vice versa. As interdependent social animals, all humans have limits and all humans are vulnerable to climate risks, but some are buffered by privilege in ways that create an illusion of climate immunity or invulnerability. And this illusion reproduces detrimental social hierarchies, such that people whose lives are buffeted by precarity are repeatedly devalued as somehow less than human. In line with a disability culture that has learned to value the humanity in all people, it's essential to move towards careful climate action that recognizes, in Naomi Klein's words, the inherent value of every person and every ecosystem, celebrating rather than denying interdependence as fundamental to survival and connection. As argued by Gruen, rather than trying to accomplish the impossible by pretending we can disentangle, we do better to think about how to be more perceptive and more responsive to the deeply entangled relationships we're in, more attentive to each other and our interconnections. In 2006, Martha Nussbaum called for imaginative courage to move beyond public cynicism and despair in forging new ways in which people might get together and decide to live together. 17 years on, in the face of accelerating climate risks, this call is ever more pressing. Yet, to find the energy to keep going, to muster such courage can be painful, particularly in the shadows of ongoing ableist responses to a global pandemic that has severely eroded the sense of self-worth and quality of life of many disabled people, at least in the UK. In research and in practice, it's more important than ever to co-create the safe, enabling, anti-oppressive, careful research spaces that are needed for human exchange and connection in this area. Spaces that challenge the idea that one's life is less valuable or worthy when ground down by often overlapping systems of oppression. So recognizing this, I will be starting this 5-year collaborative program of interdisciplinary research that aims to embed the missing knowledges of disabled people in climate adaptation scholarship. It's obviously just one very small part of this big jigsaw puzzle, but hopefully it will help. It originally should have been funded by the European Research Council, but because of our delightful government, it's not. It's funded by the UK Research and Innovation. Yeah, so I will just very briefly give some background. So it will focus on 3 urban case studies, recognising cities as important sites of innovation and transformation. So the first one is Bristol in England. It seems to be the first city globally to have co-produced a disability-led community climate action plan, which provides a really important and invaluable learning opportunity. The second is Glasgow in Scotland, which launched an innovative, transformative adaptation plan in 2021, but doesn't mention disability anywhere yet. So there's sort of potential to build on that. And then the third is Dublin in Ireland, which faces similar climate challenges, but it has, not my words, been described as a climate laggard. It also has climate responsibilities under the European Commission strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities. So hopefully in exploring ways in which they might be able to meet those, there'll be useful learning across other settings as well. So briefly, what will the case studies entail? The project comprises 3 overlapping work packages over 5 years. So work package 1 will really try and locate disability within local, national and international climate law and policy. Documentary analysis and key informant interviews will be used to identify gaps in disability rights protection, implementation and opportunities for reform. And work package 2 will explore how disabled people are anticipating, experiencing and responding to climate change. It will use in-depth qualitative and arts-based approaches that are sensitive to people's diverse communication needs and priorities. And it will examine how both privilege and precarity can shape adaptive capacity in these communities. And work package 3 will be synthesizing insights from across the 2 work packages and making sure that they are constantly talking to each other, and includes a range of workshop and engagement activities to try and envision these more proactive opportunities to create disability just and climate just cities. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop introduction to the upcoming work, and obviously very happy to chat more about it. But yeah, I'll stop there, and if I can share the slides, but there's various sorts of references and links and things that might be useful. But, yeah, thank you.
Wow. Thank you. As someone who comes from the adaptation field, I heard words there that we seldom hear in the adaptation research, like companionship or freedom. And it led me to think of adaptation as quite a sort of cold and dehumanized field in many ways. You know, as though companionship and connection and freedom should be, you know, luxuries that we don't need to look at in climate change, in the context of climate change, whereas, you know, they're absolutely foundational to meaningful life. So I don't think I want to try to attempt to even summarize. I'm conscious of time as well. I think I'd just like to open it up for questions. Maybe I'll move to the back of the room so I can see everyone in the room, and then maybe keep track of if people have a hand up. And I'm conscious, I'm so grateful for the people who are joining from completely inconvenient time zones as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And please, do take the opportunity